I never believed in Bigfoot until one saved my life. What I'm about to tell you sounds insane. Honestly, if someone had told me this story a few years ago, I would have laughed in their face. But I was there. I lived through it. And what happened to me in those mountains changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It was late January when I decided to go backcountry skiing in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. I'd been planning the trip for months, saving up vacation days, researching routes, and waiting for the perfect weather. The forecast looked ideal. Clear skies, fresh powder from a storm 2 days earlier, and just the right temperature to keep the snow dry and light. I'm an experienced skier. I've been doing backcountry trips for over a decade, always solo, because I love the peace and solitude of being alone in the wilderness. I know how to read avalanche conditions. I carried all the proper gear: beacon, probe, shovel, everything. But sometimes no amount of preparation is enough. It took about 4 hours to drive from my apartment in Seattle to the trailhead. I left before dawn, my old truck packed with gear and a thermos of coffee to keep me company on those dark mountain roads. The parking lot at the trailhead was completely empty when I arrived, not unusual for a weekday in midwinter. Most people prefer the ski resorts this time of year. I love the silence of remote country, where you can glide across untouched snow and the only sounds are your own breathing and the whisper of wind through the trees. I started skinning up around 7 a.m., skis strapped to my pack, climbing skins already in place. The plan was simple. Follow an old logging road for about 3 miles, cross a small valley, and climb to a ridge overlooking a stunning basin. I'd skied this area twice before without any problems. Conditions looked great, and everything I'd read said it was safe. The hike took longer than I expected. The snow was deeper, probably 3 feet of fresh powder near the base. Trekking through the forest was exhausting, even for someone in good shape. By the time I reached the valley floor, it was well past noon. I stopped to eat a couple of energy bars and drink some water while studying the slope above me. Everything looked stable. The storm snow seemed well bonded to the older layers beneath. There were no warning signs, no recent slides, no cracks, no whoomphing sounds, nothing. Looking back now, I can see all the little details I missed or ignored. The temperature had risen a few degrees as the sun came out. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the leeward slopes. And there was this strange feeling like I was being watched. I kept brushing it off, telling myself I was just tired, imagining things after a long climb. But deep down, something felt wrong. That sense of being watched grew stronger as I prepared to climb the ridge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but saw nothing, just forest and shadows between towering Douglas firs. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a moose or a deer tracking my movement. Animals sometimes do that out here, but this felt different. It felt intelligent, like something or someone was deliberately observing me. I reached the base of the ridge around 2 p.m. and started the final climb. It took another hour of switchbacking up the steep face, my legs burning with every step. When I finally topped out and looked down into the basin, my breath caught in my throat. It was breathtaking, a perfect amphitheater of untouched powder sparkling under the afternoon sunday. Not a single track scarred the surface. This was why I came to the mountains for moments like this. I took a few photos on my phone, caught my breath, and planned my descent. The bowl dropped nearly 1,000 vertical feet before funneling into a narrow chute that led back to the valley floor. I pointed my skis downhill, made a few wide turns at the top, and prepared to drop through the lower section. Easy, fun, perfect. But before I pushed off, something caught my eye: footprints in the snow, partially filled in, but still visible. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my boots. 5 distinct toes pressed clearly into the snow. They came up from the trees below and disappeared behind a small rise to my left. My heart started pounding. Bear tracks, I told myself. They had to be. But bears hibernate in January, and these prints didn't look like bear tracks. They looked human. Too human. I should have left right then. I should have ripped my skins off and headed straight back to the truck. But I was stubborn. I'd come all this way, and the slope looked perfect. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe the snow just settled in a weird way. Or maybe they belong to a wolverine, they're big and don't hibernate. Yeah, wolverine tracks. That had to be it. I checked my watch, 2:30 p.m., I always note the time before dropping in, just in case something goes wrong. The first few turns were amazing. The snow was that magical mix of light and dense, just enough to make you feel weightless, like floating on air. I whooped out loud as I carved through powder, spraying snow behind me in shimmering clouds. Then I heard a deep, echoing crack that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Every backcountry skier knows that sound. It's the sound of thousands of tons of snow breaking loose. I looked uphill, and my stomach dropped. A fracture line had opened about 100 feet above me, stretching from one side of the bowl to the other. The entire slope was moving. Time slowed to a crawl. I had maybe 2 seconds to decide what to do. Skiing out of it wasn't an option. The avalanche was moving faster than I could ever go. Climbing back up was impossible. My only chance was to try to stay on top, swim, fight, do anything to avoid being buried. I pointed my skis straight down and tried to build speed toward the edge of the slide, hoping the snow might move slower there. The avalanche hit me like a freight train. One moment I was skiing, the next, I was tumbling helplessly inside a roaring, churning sea of snow. My skis were ripped away instantly, my poles torn from my hands. Snow filled my mouth, nose, and eyes. I couldn't tell which way was up. The noise was deafening, a mix of thunder, cracking trees, and the relentless roar of the slide. I tried to swim, just like they teach in avalanche safety courses, thrashing, kicking, clawing for the surface. I managed one desperate gasp of air before being dragged under again. The world was pure chaos, white, spinning, suffocating. The slide probably lasted only 30 or 40 seconds, though it felt like hours. I slammed into something hard, maybe a rock, maybe a tree, and felt my left leg crack. Pain exploded through me, but there was nothing to do but keep fighting, trying to stay near the surface. And then suddenly it stopped. Everything went still. The snow around me froze solid in an instant, transforming from liquid chaos to concrete. I was buried, but not completely. My right arm stuck out above the surface, and my head was about a foot below it. I could feel the crushing weight of the snow pressing on my chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. Every breath was a battle, each gulp of air scraped through the tiny gaps in the snow in front of my face. Panic hit me instantly. I tried to move, but the snow held me tight, as if I were encased in concrete. My left leg screamed in pain every time I tried to shift. My right arm, the only thing sticking above the surface, flailed uselessly in the air. I tried to dig, but I couldn't generate any strength. The snow around my head was packed too tightly. I was trapped. I had no idea how long I'd been lying there, buried, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time meant nothing when all you're doing is fighting to stay alive. I focused on my breathing, forcing myself to stay calm, to save what little oxygen I had left. I knew panicking would only use up the air faster, but staying calm was nearly impossible. The cold had seeped into my bones. I could feel myself shaking uncontrollably, and the pain in my leg was unbearable, a deep, pulsing agony that made me want to scream, but I couldn't waste the air. Then, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate crunches in the snow above me. At first, I thought it was a rescue team. Hope surged through me. I tried to yell, but only a weak, hoarse rasp came out. I waved my bare arm frantically, trying to signal whoever was up there. The footsteps drew closer, then stopped right beside me. Something grabbed my exposed arm. The grip was enormous and impossibly strong, but it wasn't human. The fingers were too long. The hand, too powerful. And when I felt the rough, coarse hair brushing against my skin, I realized the thing pulling me out wasn't a person. Bigfoot was digging me out. I heard the snow shifting, felt the pressure on my chest begin to ease as it clawed through the debris. The creature moved with staggering speed and strength, its massive hands clearing away tons of snow in minutes. First my head emerged, then my shoulders, then my torso. I gasped for air, choking, coughing, lungs burning as cold oxygen flooded in. When enough snow had been cleared for me to turn my head, I finally saw it, the creature that had saved me. It towered over me, easily 8 feet tall, covered in a thick coat of dark brown fur that almost looked black in the dim light. Its face was an uncanny mix of human and ape, flatter than a gorilla's, yet disturbingly expressive. Intelligent eyes studied me with what looked like genuine concern. Each breath it exhaled came out in great clouds of white mist, and it smelled not foul exactly, but wild, a heavy, musky scent like earth and sweat and something primal. I should have been terrified. Everything I'd ever learned told me to fear wild animals, especially ones this massive and strong. But I wasn't afraid. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the realization that this Bigfoot, had just saved my life. When I looked into its eyes, I didn't see a monster. I saw intelligence. I saw purpose. Bigfoot didn't attack me. It was helping me. The creature kept digging until my upper body was completely free, then stopped when it reached my legs, as if it somehow knew my left leg was injured. With surprising gentleness, it dug around the wounded limb, cradling it with one enormous hand while clearing the snow away with the other. When my leg was finally free, I saw my torn ski pants and the dark stain of blood seeping through. The pain was excruciating. Bigfoot stared at my leg for a long moment, then let out a deep, low rumble from its chest, followed by a strange series of howls and growls that echoed across the Avalanche field. It was calling out to someone, or something. Lying there in the snow, dazed and shivering, I watched as another figure emerged from the tree line about 50 yards away. Another Bigfoot. This one was smaller, maybe 6.5 feet tall, with lighter brown fur. The second Bigfoot approached cautiously, pausing every few steps to scan the surroundings, alert for danger. The two creatures began to communicate, exchanging a series of low rumbles, clicks, and gestures I couldn't understand, but which were clearly part of a complex language. The first Bigfoot pointed at my leg, then at me, then motioned toward the forest. The smaller one nodded, almost human-like, before stepping closer to examine my injury. At that moment, I realized I was witnessing something extraordinary. These weren't mindless beasts. They were communicating, reasoning, showing compassion for a wounded member of another species. The second Bigfoot knelt beside my leg, gently probing around the break with surprisingly slender fingers. Its touch was careful, almost clinical. When I winced in pain, it immediately pulled back and made a soft cooing sound, as if apologizing. The two exchanged another brief conversation, then the larger one scooped me up effortlessly into its arms. I'm not a small guy, 6 feet tall, about 170 pounds, but it lifted me like I weighed nothing. It held me against its chest, and I could feel the deep, comforting warmth radiating through its thick fur. The second Bigfoot gathered a few long sticks and followed as we started moving. The first Bigfoot carried me across the avalanche debris, while the second one walked 10 yards to our right, scanning the forest like a lookout. This was coordinated, deliberate teamwork. They were helping me together. We moved through the forest for what must have been over a mile. The Bigfoot carrying me moved with astonishing grace for something its size, stepping over fallen logs and ducking beneath branches without ever jostling me. It moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Then it suddenly stopped and made a sharp clicking sound. The second Bigfoot froze instantly. Both stood perfectly still. I could feel the tension in the creature's arms tighten around me. I held my breath, listening. Somewhere ahead, deep among the trees, came a low growl, maybe a mountain lion, maybe a wolf. The Bigfoot holding me answered with a deep, resonant growl of its own, part warning, part challenge. The sound vibrated through its chest and into mine. Whatever was out there must have decided we weren't worth the trouble, because the noise faded away. After a moment, they relaxed and continued on. Eventually, we reached what I can only describe as Bigfoot's shelter. It was a natural cave, formed by massive boulders stacked together to create a hidden space beneath. The entrance was masked by dense brush and broken branches, clearly arranged with purpose. Inside, the space opened into a room about the size of a small bedroom. The floor was covered with dry grass, moss, and evergreen branches. It was warm, windproof, and faintly smelled of smoke. Near the entrance was a small fire pit, though no fire burned at the moment. But this wasn't just a cave, it was a home. The walls had rough shelves carved into the stone, holding what looked like dried plants, berries, and strips of meat. There were primitive tools, stone flakes, sharpened sticks, shaped pieces of wood. And in one corner was something like a bed, a raised platform of branches covered in moss and thick animal hides. The larger Bigfoot laid me gently on a soft patch near the fire pit. The smaller one immediately began gathering materials for a fire, moving with clear purpose, choosing specific logs from a neatly stacked pile near the entrance. Everything was organized, planned. These creatures lived here. The big one knelt beside me again, its intelligent eyes studying my broken leg. Then it did something that shocked me more than anything else that had happened that day. It started to treat my injury. The smaller Bigfoot left the cave and returned a few minutes later carrying an armful of snow. Carefully, it packed the snow around my swollen leg. The cold numbed the pain instantly. Then the larger one disappeared for a moment and came back with strips of bark and fibrous plant material. With astonishing skill, it realigned my ankle. I nearly passed out from the pain and used the bark strips to splint it, binding everything tightly with twisted plant fibers. While it worked on my leg, the smaller Bigfoot started the fire. I watched in awe as it used a method I'd never seen before, spinning a stick rapidly between its palms against a wooden base until smoke rose, then transferring the ember into a bundle of dry grass. Within minutes, a small flame flickered to life, warming the cave. The precision and control it showed were incredible. It arranged the wood carefully, managing the flame's size, adding larger pieces to maximize heat and minimize smoke. Over the next few hours, both Bigfoots tended to me with astonishing care. The larger one finished splinting my leg, then brought me water in what looked like a hollowed-out piece of wood, gently lifting it to my lips. The smaller one pulled a bundle of dried roots from one of the shelves and began to prepare something I couldn't yet identify. The smaller Bigfoot chewed something, a root, I think, and handed me the pulpy mash. I hesitated, but it gestured firmly, pointing first to my injured leg, then to its mouth. I got the message. I took the root from its hand and put it in my mouth. It was bitter, earthy, and slightly numbing. Within minutes, the pain in my leg started to fade. Bigfoot had given me some kind of natural painkiller. I tried to say thank you, but all that came out was a raspy whisper. Somehow, it seemed to understand. It rumbled softly, a low, gentle sound that felt like acknowledgement. As night fell, the smaller Bigfoot left the cave. The larger one stayed with me, tending the fire and keeping watch like a silent guardian. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body wrecked by exhaustion and injury. Each time I opened my eyes, the larger Bigfoot was still there, silhouetted against the flickering firelight near the cave entrance. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of them communicating again. The smaller Bigfoot had returned, growling urgently. The big one rose instantly and moved to the entrance. Both stood there for several tense minutes, peering into the darkness, exchanging short, clicking sounds. I could feel the tension radiating off them. Then I heard distant calls echoing through the night. They weren't like the soft vocalizations I'd heard before. These were loud, harsh, almost territorial. The first Bigfoot backed into the cave, positioning itself between me and the entrance like a wall of muscle and fur. The smaller one remained at the opening, staring out into the black forest. The distant calls went on for about 20 minutes, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Both Bigfoots stayed alert, unmoving, until the forest fell silent again. That was when I realized something chilling. Even here, deep in the wilderness, even among their own kind, these creatures had enemies. There was danger out there, even for them. When the calls finally faded, both of them began to relax. The smaller one came deeper into the cave, curled up near the fire, and turned its back to the flame. The larger Bigfoot sat down near me again, cross-legged on the cave floor. A few minutes later, I could hear the smaller one's slow, deep breathing, the unmistakable rhythm of sleep. But the larger one stayed awake, watching over us both. At dawn, I woke to find the cave empty. Both Bigfoots were gone. Panic hit me immediately. Had they abandoned me? How was I supposed to get out of here? My leg was useless. I had no gear, no food, no way to call for help. My phone, beacon, everything had been lost in the avalanche. Before the panic could fully take hold, I heard movement outside. Then the two Bigfoots returned. The larger one carried what looked like roots and tubers, while the smaller one had strips of dried meat draped over its arm. They offered the food to me, and I accepted. I was starving. The roots were tough and fibrous, with a faint sweetness. The meat was hard and chewy, but edible. It wasn't much of a meal, but it was food and I desperately needed it. The larger Bigfoot watched me eat with curious fascination, tilting its head as I struggled to chew the tough roots. It grunted softly, took one of the roots, and demonstrated how to chew it, using its molars, grinding instead of biting. When I mimicked its technique, the root became much easier to eat. The Bigfoot made a low, approving sound, almost like praise. For the next 3 days, I lived in that cave with the two of them. A rhythm slowly formed. The smaller Bigfoot left early each morning, usually returning around midday with food or water. The larger one stayed with me most of the time, tending the fire, cleaning my wound when it began to show signs of infection, and occasionally stepping out to gather plants or materials. They didn't speak, not in any language I recognized, but they constantly communicated through gestures, sounds, and expressions. Their intent was always clear. They pointed at objects, grumbled in varying tones, and I began to pick up the basics. A deep rumble meant approval or contentment. A sharp growl meant warning. A series of clicks expressed curiosity or question. And gentle, rhythmic clacking, almost like a soft purr, seemed to mean reassurance or comfort. I started trying to communicate back. I pointed to things and named them in English, though I had no idea if they understood. I said thank you, maybe 1,000 times, trying to express the gratitude I felt toward the creature that had saved my life. And sometimes, I swear it understood. The larger Bigfoot would tilt its head, those intelligent eyes locking on mine, and I could see recognition there, understanding. On the second day, something incredible happened. I tried to tell the larger Bigfoot that I was thirsty. I pointed to the wooden bowl of water, then to my mouth. It stared at me for a moment, then walked over, picked up the bowl, and brought it to me. But before handing it over, it pointed to the bowl, then to its own mouth, miming a drinking motion, confirming my request. It understood. That wasn't mimicry, it was communication, real communication. From that moment on, our relationship changed. It became cooperative. When I pointed to my leg and winced, Bigfoot would bring me the pain relief roots. When I gestured that I was cold, it would add wood to the fire or cover me with extra layers of moss and ferns. Sometimes, it even started teaching me sounds, low rumbles, sharp clicks, repeating them until I mimicked them correctly. I was learning their language, and they were teaching me. Whenever Bigfoot left the cave, it made a distinct clicking sound, its way of saying it was heading out. When it was about to return, I'd hear that same sound echo faintly from outside. It was signaling its presence, announcing itself. The smaller Bigfoot remained wary of me, but would occasionally bring back curious treasures from its foraging trips, smooth stones, strange plants, even once a single bird feather, which it seemed immensely proud of. It would present these finds to the larger Bigfoot, who would inspect them thoughtfully, sometimes setting them on the shelf, other times discarding them. There was decision-making happening, clear evaluation, deliberate judgment. Then, on the third day, I witnessed something that changed everything I thought I knew about these beings. The smaller Bigfoot had been gone since dawn, but when it returned early that afternoon, it was injured. A deep gash ran across its shoulder, blood matting the thick fur. The larger Bigfoot rushed to it immediately, clicking anxiously. What happened next left me speechless. The big one went to the shelf and chose several plants, not at random, but with clear purpose. It chewed the leaves into a paste and carefully applied it to the wound, then used bark and fibrous strands to bandage the injury, the exact same method it had used to splint my leg. This was medicine. Real, intentional, learned medicine. The injured Bigfoot sat patiently, flinching occasionally but never resisting. The healer moved gently, cleaning the wound, applying the poultice, binding it tight. When it was finished, the larger Bigfoot made a soft cooing sound, and the smaller one answered in kind, a low hum of reassurance and compassion. I pointed at the injured Bigfoot, trying to convey concern with my expression. The healer looked from me to its companion and back again. It seemed to understand what I was asking. Then it nodded, actually nodded, and let out a quiet rumble that I'd come to recognize as meaning it's okay. That night, the three of us sat around the fire. My leg was improving, the swelling had gone down, the sharp pain had dulled to a steady ache. The smaller Bigfoot's wound had stopped bleeding, and despite its injury, it seemed cheerful. The larger one tended the flames, occasionally making soft, rhythmic hums, almost like a song. It was peaceful, surreal, but peaceful. I was sitting in a cave with two Bigfoots, sharing warmth, sharing food, being cared for as if I were part of their family. I thought about every story I'd ever heard, the myths, the sightings, the legends that painted Bigfoot as a monster or a mystery. But here, in that cave, I saw none of that. I saw living, thinking beings trying to survive a harsh world with intelligence, empathy, and cooperation. They weren't monsters, they were simply alive, just like us. By the fourth day, my leg was much better. I could sit up without getting dizzy and even put a little weight on it. The larger Bigfoot seemed to sense my recovery and made a decision. That afternoon, it gestured for me to wait, then left the cave. When it returned, it carried 2 long, sturdy branches. With deliberate care, it stripped away the smaller twigs and smoothed the wood as best it could. It had made me crutches. The creature helped me to my feet, placing the crutches under my arms and steadying me until I found my balance. I took a few cautious steps, painful but possible. The larger Bigfoot watched closely, letting out deep, encouraging rumbles every time I managed another step. The smaller one looked on proudly, its expression almost parental, as if watching a child take their first steps. Then the larger Bigfoot did something that made my heart sink. It pointed at me, then toward the forest, the direction we had come from. It was telling me it was time to leave, time to go back to civilization, and it would take me there. The smaller Bigfoot walked to the cave entrance, peering out at the trees. The larger one joined it, and they exchanged a quiet series of growls and gestures. I couldn't understand their words, but I could tell they were discussing the journey ahead. Finally, they both turned toward me and nodded. We left at dusk, all 3 of us. The larger Bigfoot walked beside me, always within reach in case I stumbled, while the smaller one scouted ahead, clicking occasionally to signal that the path was clear. The trek was brutal. Every step sent waves of pain through my leg. I had to stop frequently to rest, but they never rushed me, never grew impatient. When the terrain grew too steep or rough for crutches, the larger Bigfoot simply lifted me and carried me, just as it had the day it saved me. The smaller one would take the crutches and follow along. Their coordination was flawless. We traveled through the night, guided by moonlight. The Bigfoots seemed to know every inch of the forest. I dozed off several times in the arms of my massive rescuer, completely trusting the creatures who had become my protectors. The smaller one remained vigilant, stopping often to listen, scanning the trees for threats. Around midnight, we paused in a small clearing. The larger Bigfoot gently set me down while both of them moved to the edge of the clearing, staring back into the woods. They stood motionless for minutes, listening. Then I heard it distant calls again, echoing through the forest. The same kind of calls I'd heard on that first night. They were following us. The lead Bigfoot made a quick decision. It signaled to the smaller one, who immediately came to my side, helping me up and handing me the crutches. We moved faster now, more urgently. The larger Bigfoot led the way, breaking a path through the snow, while the smaller one stayed close behind me, steadying me whenever I faltered. The calls grew louder, closer, and now I could distinguish multiple voices, at least 3 or 4. Whatever was following us was gaining ground, but my rescuers kept moving, determined to push forward without confrontation. We continued through the forest for another hour until the sounds faded behind us. The Bigfoot slowed their pace, and I could finally breathe again. I was exhausted, my injured legs screaming with pain, but I kept going. They had protected me this far. I trusted they'd see me home. By dawn, the trees began to thin. Through the branches ahead, I saw at the trailhead parking lot my truck, exactly where I'd left it 4 days earlier. We were about 100 yards away. The larger Bigfoot lowered me gently to the ground and handed me the crutches. The smaller one placed them in my hands carefully, making sure I had a firm grip. Both of them stood there, watching me for a long moment. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions I would never get answers to. Why had they saved me? Where did they come from? How many of them were out there? But I knew they weren't meant to be studied, captured, or exposed. They lived in secrecy for a reason. I raised my hand, the universal human gesture of gratitude and farewell. The larger Bigfoot looked at it for a moment, then extended its enormous hand and gently clasped mine. Its palm was rough, warm, undeniably real. We held that connection for just a heartbeat before it released me and stepped back. The smaller one followed, taking my hand in its own. Its grip was softer, but just as warm. Then, unexpectedly, it reached into the fur on its chest and pulled out a small cluster of dark berries. I hadn't even noticed them before. It pressed them into my palm, a gift, a memento, something to remember them by. I wanted to speak to thank them again, to promise I'd never forget. But before I could get the words out, they both turned and walked into the forest. Within seconds, they vanished among the trees, moving so silently it was as if they had never been there at all. I stood there for a long moment, then hobbled toward my truck on the crutches they'd made for me. It was still there, half buried in fresh snow. I reached under the wheel well for the magnetic spare key, a habit that had just saved my life and unlocked the door. Getting in with a broken leg was agony, but I managed. Before starting the engine, I opened my hand. The berries lay there small, deep purple, unlike any species I'd ever seen. I placed them gently in the glove box. I still have them to this day, dried and sealed in a small glass jar. They're the only proof I have that what happened out there was real. After that, I drove straight to the nearest hospital, about an hour away. The emergency room staff were stunned when I hobbled in on those rough wooden crutches covered in dirt and dried blood, sunburned, clearly injured but somehow still standing. They rushed me inside, and a doctor quickly examined my leg. "You've got a fractured tibia," she said, along with multiple bruises and significant soft tissue damage. Then she frowned. But the splint, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. It kept the bone perfectly aligned. Whoever treated you out there probably saved your leg from permanent damage. I told her I'd done it myself, that I'd been caught in an avalanche, dug myself out, and splinted my own leg before walking miles back to my truck. It was a ridiculous story. No one with a broken leg could possibly hike that far through the mountains, but it was still more believable than the truth. So I said it must have been adrenaline, maybe shock, maybe I just didn't feel the pain. The doctor didn't press me, but I could tell she didn't fully buy it. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days, pumping me full of antibiotics to fight the infection creeping up my leg, keeping me hydrated, feeding me hot meals, and letting me rest in a real bed. The search and rescue team came to interview me about what had happened. I gave them the same story, the avalanche, the self-rescue, the long walk out. They were skeptical, especially when they realized I'd lost all my gear and come out of it with only one broken leg. They told me most people buried in avalanches that size don't survive. And if they do, they're usually far more battered than I was. "You're one lucky man," one of them said. He was right about the luck, just not in the way he thought. The nurses were especially curious about the plant residue they found on my leg when they removed the splint. There was some kind of sap mixed with dried blood and dirt. They asked what I'd used on the wound. I told them I'd grabbed whatever plants I could find and did my best, trying to remember old wilderness first aid lessons. They sent samples to a lab, but no one ever told me what they found. My guess? It didn't make sense to them. One nurse commented on the crutches I'd brought in, how well made they were for something built in the field. She said whoever carved them must have been skilled with wood, and asked if I was a carpenter. I just shrugged and said I'd gotten lucky with the branches I found. She told me to keep them a souvenir of survival, and I did. When I was finally discharged, I took those crutches home and thought about what had happened for years, really. About the 2 Bigfoots who'd saved my life, tended my wounds, and then let me go. About why they'd done it. I still don't have a satisfying answer. Maybe they were curious about humans. Maybe their kind has some moral instinct, a code that drives them to help a creature in distress. Maybe the first one was simply lonely, and I was company for a brief moment in its strange, solitary life. Or maybe, and this is what I truly believe, it saw another living being in danger and chose to help. Maybe it's that simple. We like to think compassion and empathy belong only to us. But what if we're wrong? What if there are other intelligent beings out there that share those same values quietly, unseen, doing what's right when no one's watching? I've never told anyone the real story about what happened on that mountain. Not my friends, not my family, not the authorities. Who would believe me? Honestly, some nights, even I have trouble believing it. But I was there. I have no proof. No photos, no physical evidence, just memories. A once shattered leg that healed with only a slight limp, a handful of dried purple berries, and a pair of handmade crutches. But I know what I saw. I know what saved my life that day. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about them. I wonder if they're still out there living in that same cave, foraging through those same forests. I wonder if the smaller one's shoulder ever fully healed. I wonder if they ever think about me, the human they pulled from the snow. 6 months after the avalanche, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I went back to those mountains. Not to ski, my leg still wasn't strong enough, but just to see the place again. I hiked as far as I could, following what I believed was the same route they had taken to carry me out. I brought supplies, dried meat, nuts, berries, and a small first aid kit, and left them neatly piled beneath a distinctive boulder I remembered. A week later, I returned. Everything was gone. In its place was a perfectly balanced stack of stones, too precise, too deliberate to be natural. Beside it lay a cluster of fresh purple berries, arranged carefully on a broad leaf, the same kind of berries the smaller Bigfoot had once given me. I took it as a thank you, a sign that they remembered. After that, I kept leaving supplies every few weeks through spring and summer. Sometimes they disappeared within days. Other times they sat untouched for weeks before vanishing, but they always vanished. And there was always something left behind: stones, berries, and once, a small carved piece of wood shaped almost like a tiny figurine. I never saw them again. I think they made sure of that. But I know they're still out there watching from the trees, keeping their distance, acknowledging our connection in their own quiet way. By autumn, I stopped leaving supplies, not because I wanted to end the connection, but because I knew it was time to let them return fully to their lives without me. What we'd shared had been extraordinary, but it was meant to be temporary. They'd saved me, healed me, and set me free. Continuing to search for them felt like it would cheapen that gift. Since then, I've gone back to the mountains. I still ski, though more carefully now with a deeper respect for nature's power. But I also pay attention in ways I never used to. I notice signs tracks too large to be human, strange sounds in the forest that don't match any known animal, stones stacked just a little too neatly, branches arranged a bit too deliberately. And sometimes, just sometimes when the wind is still and the forest quiet, I feel that old familiar sensation again. The feeling of being watched, but now instead of fear, I feel comfort. I like to think those gentle giants are still out there somewhere in the vast wilderness where humans rarely tread, living their lives, surviving in the harsh mountain world, existing just beyond the edges of our understanding. And I hope that if Bigfoot ever comes across another person in trouble, they'll help them too. Because that's what they did for me. People sometimes ask if I believe in Bigfoot. They expect me to laugh, to shrug it off as myth, a campfire story, a human invention. But I don't laugh. I just smile and tell them that the world is far bigger and stranger than most of us imagine, that there are things out there we simply don't understand. And maybe, just maybe, some of those old legends carry a fragment of truth. Because I know the truth. I lived it. And nothing anyone says will ever convince me otherwise. That experience changed me in ways I can hardly describe. I see the wilderness differently now. I used to think of it as a playground, a place to test myself, to chase adventure. Now, I see it as something living, a vast, breathing presence with its own rules, its own inhabitants. Some we know, some we don't. I approach the mountains with humility now and gratitude. I think about the kindness of those two towering, fur-covered beings who showed me more compassion than many people ever have. They didn't have to save me. They could have left me buried in the snow and gone on with their lives. But they made a choice to dig me out, to heal me, to carry me to safety, to shield me from danger. That choice haunts me in the best possible way. It makes me want to be better, to show that same selfless compassion toward others. If Bigfoot could do it, then surely so can I. I've started volunteering with search and rescue teams. I can't climb or ski like I used to, my leg won't let me, but I help coordinate missions, plan routes, keep the others safe. It feels like the right thing to do. It feels like honoring the gift I was given. Sometimes those missions take me back into the Cascades, not far from where it all happened. I keep my eyes open, always scanning for signs, but I've never seen them again. Maybe I never will. Maybe that one encounter was all I was meant to have. Still, I like to believe they're out there watching from the trees, guarding the wilderness, living their quiet, hidden lives, and sometimes, just sometimes, helping lost or wounded travelers when they choose to. The mountains are vast. There are still wild places left where people rarely go. And if any creature could remain hidden in our modern world, it would be something intelligent and cautious like the Bigfoots I met. I still have the rough wooden crutches they made for me. They stand in my garage, leaning against the back wall. Sometimes I catch sight of them reach out, touch the smooth, weathered wood, and for a moment, I'm back in that cave, back in those 4 impossible days with beings that shouldn't exist. Those crutches mean everything to me. They're proof, tangible proof of what happened. My leg healed well. I still limp a little when I'm tired, when the weather changes. I can't run like before, but I'm alive. I'm still here, and that's more than I ever had a right to expect after being buried under tons of snow. I've read every account I can find about Bigfoot encounters. Most describe them as shy, elusive, avoiding humans at all costs. A few mention aggression, though that seems rare. But almost none describe what I experienced Bigfoot's actively helping a human in need. Maybe mine were different. Maybe they were the exception. Or maybe there are other stories like mine, stories untold, because no one would believe them. How many others were rescued, cared for, and kept silent out of fear of ridicule? I think about the native tribes of the Pacific Northwest, the people who've spoken of Sasquatch for centuries. Their stories tell of guardians of the forest, beings who exist between the world of humans and animals. Some tales describe them guiding lost travelers, healing the wounded, protecting children who stray too far from camp. Maybe they've always known the truth. Maybe their legends were born from real encounters, from real relationships between us and those mysterious forest dwellers. Science dismisses Bigfoot as folklore, a myth, a cultural phenomenon, a case of mistaken identity. They demand evidence, bones, bodies, DNA. But what if Bigfoot is smart enough not to leave any? What if they understand that discovery would mean the end of their way of life? A creature capable of using tools, planning, problem-solving, healing. A creature capable of compassion would surely be capable of hiding. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm just a man who lived through something impossible, something absolutely real. Bigfoot exists. Somewhere out there in those mountains, they still walk among the trees. And I hope one day the world will finally see proof, not because I need it, but because I think the world would be better knowing we share this planet with another intelligent, gentle species. Maybe that knowledge would make us more humble, more careful with the wild places and the beings that call them home. But I also understand why they hide. Humans don't have a good track record with the things we don't understand. We capture them, study them, cage them, or kill them. Maybe Bigfoot's secrecy isn't mystery, maybe it's wisdom. All I know is this. On a freezing January afternoon, when I was buried under a mountain of snow and certain I was going to die, 2 Bigfoots chose to save me. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. And when I was safe, they vanished back into the wild. That kind of pure, selfless grace is rare even among humans. So yes, I believe in Bigfoot. How could I not? More than that, I'm grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful for the experience. And grateful that somewhere in the endless wilderness of the Cascades, 2 Bigfoots once looked at a broken, helpless man and decided his life was worth saving. I'll carry that truth with me for the rest of my life. And maybe, someday, I'll go back to those mountains and from far off, I'll see something massive and brown moving between the trees. Maybe I'll find new footprints in the snow prints too large to be human. Maybe I'll stumble across another carefully stacked pile of stones, or a small carved token left in a place only I would recognize. And maybe, just maybe, I'll have the chance to say thank you one more time. Until then, I have my story. I have my memories. I have the crutches, the dried berries, and the tiny carved wooden figure on my shelf. And I know this world is far stranger and far more wonderful than most people ever realize. There are mysteries out there, in the wild places, beings that live just beyond the reach of our understanding. And sometimes, if you're lucky and desperate enough, one of them might just save your life. That's my story. That's what happened to me. Believe it or don't, but I was there. I lived it. And nothing will ever convince me that Bigfoot isn't real because 2 of them saved my life. And for that, I owe them everything.